April 26, 1986. In the middle of the night, while most of the world was asleep, one of the worst disasters in human history began inside a nuclear power plant deep in the Soviet Union. What started as a simple safety test quickly turned into a nightmare. A massive explosion ripped through a nuclear reactor. Deadly radiation filled the air. Entire cities were poisoned. Thousands of lives changed forever. And the most horrifying part was this. At first, almost nobody understood how dangerous the situation truly was. Families slept peacefully only a few kilometers away. Children played outside under radioactive skies. Firefighters rushed directly into deadly radiation without protective equipment. Many of them would never return home. This is the terrifying story of the Chernobyl disaster. Part 1. The Soviet Dream. To understand the disaster, we first need to understand the Soviet Union during the 1980s. The Soviet government wanted to prove its technological power to the world. Nuclear energy was seen as the future. It provided electricity to millions of homes and symbolized scientific progress. Because of this, nuclear power plants were built across the country. One of the largest was the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, located near the border of Ukraine and Belarus. The plant sat beside a newly built city called Pripyat. Pripyat was designed especially for plant workers and their families. The city looked modern and successful. Wide streets stretched between apartment buildings. There were schools, parks, hospitals, cinemas, restaurants, and even an amusement park that was scheduled to open soon. Around 50,000 people lived there. Most residents were young families. To many people, Pripyat represented the perfect Soviet future: safe, modern, prosperous. But hidden behind this image was a dangerous problem. The nuclear reactors at Chernobyl had serious design flaws, and very few people truly understood how dangerous those flaws could become. Part 2. Reactor number 4. Inside the power plant stood 4 nuclear reactors. The most important one in this story was reactor number 4. Nuclear reactors work by splitting atoms to produce enormous amounts of heat. That heat creates steam. The steam spins turbines, and the turbines generate electricity. When controlled properly, the process is stable, but nuclear energy is extremely powerful. If control is lost, the consequences can be catastrophic. On April 25th, 1986, workers prepared to perform a safety experiment on Reactor 4. The test had one goal. Engineers wanted to know whether the reactor's spinning turbines could continue producing enough electricity for a short time during a power outage. Emergency generators needed around 40 seconds to fully activate. During those seconds, the plant could lose important cooling systems. The experiment was supposed to solve that problem. It sounded like an ordinary technical test, but several delays forced the reactor to operate under unusual conditions for many hours. As time passed, pressure inside the reactor slowly increased. The reactor became unstable, and the workers were entering extremely dangerous territory without fully realizing it. Part 3. The night of the disaster. Late at night, operators began lowering the reactor's power, but suddenly, the power level dropped too low. The reactor became unstable. Instead of shutting everything down, the operators tried to raise the power again. To do this, they removed too many control rods. Control rods are critical safety devices used to control the nuclear reaction. Without enough rods inside the reactor became dangerously unpredictable. At the same time, several automatic safety systems were turned off to continue the experiment. The reactor was now operating in a condition it was never designed to handle safely. Inside the control room, warning alarms appeared, but the test continued. At exactly 1:23 in the morning, the operators began the experiment. Almost immediately, the reactor started behaving violently. Power levels surged uncontrollably. The operators panicked. One worker pressed the emergency shutdown button. This button was supposed to stop the reaction instantly, but because of a fatal design flaw, the shutdown actually caused an even bigger power surge. Within seconds, the reactor exploded. A massive blast shook the building. The concrete roof was blown apart. Steel pipes shattered. Burning debris flew into the night sky. A second explosion followed moments later. The reactor core was completely exposed, and for the first time in history, a nuclear reactor fire burned openly into the atmosphere. Part 4. The Invisible Killer. At first, Many workers did not understand what had happened. Some believed a water tank had exploded. Others thought the reactor was still intact, but they were terribly wrong. The explosion had released massive amounts of radioactive material into the environment. Radiation is especially terrifying because it is invisible. You cannot see it, you cannot smell it, and you often cannot feel it until it is already damaging your body. That night, radioactive particles spread through the air like poison. Plant workers walked through radioactive smoke without protection. Firefighters rushed to the scene, believing they were fighting a normal industrial fire. Many climbed directly onto the reactor building. Some picked up pieces of burning graphite with their bare hands. They had no idea those black fragments were highly radioactive reactor material. Within minutes, some firefighters began experiencing strange symptoms: dizziness, vomiting, severe headaches, a metallic taste in their mouths. Their skin began turning red from radiation burns. But still, nobody fully understood the scale of the disaster. Part 5. Pripyat. Only a few kilometers away, life in Pripyat continued normally. Residents woke up and prepared for another ordinary day. Children went outside to play. Families looked out from balconies toward the power plant, where strange glowing lights filled the sky. Some people even walked outside to watch the fire from a distance because they thought it looked beautiful. But invisible radiation was already covering the city. The air itself had become dangerous. Parents unknowingly exposed their children. People breathed radioactive dust into their lungs. Food and water became contaminated, and still, Soviet authorities delayed evacuation. Officials feared panic. They also feared damaging the image of the Soviet Union. For nearly 36 hours after the explosion, people remained inside the contaminated city. Part 6. The evacuation. Finally, the government ordered a full evacuation of Pripyat. Hundreds of buses entered the city. Police officers walked through neighborhoods, announcing the evacuation through loudspeakers. Residents were told to bring only essential items. They were informed the evacuation would last only a few days. Most people believed they would soon return home, but they never returned. Families left behind photographs, clothes, toys, pets, and entire lives. Children abandoned classrooms filled with books and school supplies. Meals remained on tables. Apartments stayed exactly as they were on the day people fled. Within hours, the city became empty, silent, frozen in time. Pripyat had become a ghost city, and even today, many parts of the city remain abandoned. Part 7. The fight to stop the disaster. Meanwhile, the situation at the reactor continued worsening. The exposed nuclear core was still burning. Radiation poured into the atmosphere every hour. Scientists feared an even larger explosion could occur if molten nuclear fuel reached nearby water tanks. If that happened, the explosion might destroy other reactors and contaminate much of Europe. Thousands of people were mobilized to stop the disaster. Helicopter pilots flew directly over the burning reactor, dropping sand, lead, clay, and chemicals into the flames. Many received enormous doses of radiation during these flights. Workers known as liquidators were sent into highly radioactive zones to clean debris and contain contamination. Some missions were so dangerous that workers could only remain near the reactor for seconds before risking deadly radiation exposure. One group of workers entered flooded underground tunnels to drain water beneath the reactor. They knew the mission might kill them, but they volunteered anyway. These people became heroes. Without their sacrifice, experts believe the disaster could have become far worse. Part 8. The world learns the truth. At first, Soviet authorities attempted to hide the disaster from the world, but radiation cannot remain hidden. Several days later, workers at a nuclear plant in Sweden detected unusual radiation levels on their clothing. At first, they thought their own reactor was leaking, but investigations revealed the radiation was coming from somewhere else. Eventually, scientists traced the contamination back to the Soviet Union. Only then did Soviet officials publicly admit that a nuclear accident had occurred. The world was shocked. Fear spread rapidly across Europe. Countries began monitoring food, water, and air for contamination. People worried about radioactive rain. The disaster became international news. And suddenly, the world saw how dangerous nuclear accidents could become. Part 9. The Aftermath. The long-term consequences of Chernobyl were devastating. Large areas surrounding the reactor became unsafe for human life. Entire villages were abandoned forever. Forests became contaminated. Animals suffered genetic mutations. Thousands of people developed illnesses linked to radiation exposure. Many workers and firefighters died from acute radiation sickness shortly after the disaster. Others later developed cancers and health complications. The exact number of deaths remains debated even today. To contain the destroyed reactor, engineers built a massive concrete structure around Reactor 4. This structure became known as the sarcophagus. Years later, a giant steel containment system was placed over the reactor to prevent further radiation leaks. Even decades later, parts of the exclusion zone remain dangerous. Nature has slowly reclaimed the abandoned cities and villages. Trees grow through buildings. Roads disappear beneath forests. Animals roam through empty streets. Pripyat now stands as one of the eeriest abandoned places on Earth. Ending. The Chernobyl disaster was not just a technological failure. It was a tragedy caused by human mistakes, dangerous design flaws, and secrecy. But it also became a story of courage, of firefighters who entered deadly radiation to save others, of workers who risked their lives to prevent an even greater catastrophe, and of ordinary families forced to leave everything behind forever. Nearly 40 years later, the name Chernobyl still terrifies people around the world because it reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones we cannot see, and once unleashed, some disasters can never truly be erased.